Hi everyone, welcome back to Farrand Film, and I mentioned this at the end of the box office update this week, that what I'm going to start doing is in line with things that are already in the cinema or things that are going to come out of the cinema. I'm going to give you basically my Farrand's 5, my top 5 films of a certain category. So this week I'm going to give you my top 5 video game adaptations. Now we've already done a tier list on video game films, which you can find on the channel, where Ollie and Michael, apologise, basically looked at the pantheon of everything that's been released, put it in the sort of first 2, 1, 2, 2, all that kind of stuff. But this is my sort of top 5 personal video game adaptations, because I couldn't help but think when I went and watched the dumpster fire that is Borderlands, what actually warrants a good video game adaptation. Have there been many that are actually good? And to be fair, I do think there aren't many that are spectacular. I wouldn't even say that the number one in this list is spectacular. And it's such a bizarre thing to look at in terms of what is it that isn't translating to screen in terms of a film when you look at adapting a video game. What is it that's not necessarily translating there? And I think that's quite fascinating to look at. So I'm going to kick it off with my number 5. Now, my number 5 is the most recent one on the list. It's 2023's Gran Turismo. Now, me and Ollie went to go and see this, and we reviewed it as well around about the time that we did the tier list. And I don't think either of us were expecting this to be as well sort of translated, I suppose, is the way to talk about it. So basically what they've done is they've taken the Gran Turismo IP, and they've taken the true story of Jan Mardenborough, who was a teenage Gran Turismo player who then became a professional racing car driver. Now, it stars Archie Madekwe as Jan. It also stars David Harbour and Orlando Bloom. Fairly decent cast, and they all do an extremely good job, and the film itself works. It's this sort of like nuts and bolts, almost sports film, almost biopic, and it works in a sort of like, you know, we're going to see this guy get trained up and he's going to do extremely well, and then he's going to hit a conflict, and how's he going to overcome the conflict, and I think it does it incredibly well. So that's my number 5, Gran Turismo. At number 4, 2002's Resident Evil. Now, I must admit, I'm not a fan of the sequels. I'm not a fan of where this series ended up going, but there is something that I do quite enjoy about Resident Evil. So this is directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, starring Milla Jovovich, Michelle Rodriguez, amongst other people. First installment of the series, based on the video game series of the same name. Now, it does take elements from the first game and the second game as well, and it feeds into the Umbrella Corporation a little bit more. But as a sort of standard horror film as it goes, I really enjoyed this, and it's one of those films that is almost like an easy view, that you would just go back and watch. And in terms of faithfulness to the source, I think it has it a little bit, and then it does get a little bit silly as the sort of the other installments come along. So that's my number 4. That's Resident Evil. At number 3, 2020, Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, we're not talking about that abomination that was apparently going to be released and then wasn't afterwards. But my first video game was Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Christmas 1990, I want to say 4. Although actually no, it would have been Christmas 95. I was gifted a Sega Mega Drive with Sonic the Hedgehog 2. And I love Sonic. I think Sonic's great. Ruby loves Sonic. We both thought this film was decent. You know, it did exactly what it needed to. I do think this is better than the second one. I've not seen any of the Knuckles series, but for me, it did exactly everything that it needed to. It's quite campy. It's quite comic. It's incredibly bright. It's essentially a kids' film through and through. And Jim Carrey's Robotnik is fantastic as well. So what's not to like about Sonic the Hedgehog? My number 2 is based on the Pokemon franchise. It's Detective Pikachu. It's also apparently a loose adaptation of the 2016 video game of the same name. Now, I didn't play Detective Pikachu. I am a Pokemon Red kind of person. And for me, sort of going through it and seeing the sort of the anime series and seeing the film, and with the sort of Mewtwo and Mew at the end and stuff like that, Detective Pikachu was one that when it was released, I remember thinking, oh, I wouldn't mind going and seeing that, and then just for whatever reason missing it at the cinema and actually only catching up with it when we did the tier list. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it much more than I thought I would do. I think it balances that sort of expectation of you having a knowledge of Pokemon and people necessarily not doing, but the blend of live action and CGI animation works incredibly well as well. So that's my number 2, and that's Detective Pikachu. So my number 1, 2018 action adventure film, Tomb Raider. Okay, now this isn't the Angelina Jolie Lara Croft Tomb Raider, which admittedly I have a little bit of a soft spot for, a little bit of an affinity for, but this is the Alicia Vikander film that came out, like I say, in 2018, that is more based on the 2013 reboot of Tomb Raider that was released on consoles, which is a fantastic game. I really enjoyed that one. I enjoyed the sequel, which name has gone straight out of my head. I struggled with the third one. I remember saying this on the tier list, that the high death rate just didn't translate for me. But basically what it does is it takes inspiration, the film takes inspiration from that reboot, from the sort of sequels around it, and it gets it so right. It manages just to sort of take it and put it on screen, and it does it really, really well. Now, if I was telling you about video game adaptations that were not just films, but also including TV shows, I think it would be no surprise to anybody that The Last of Us would be my number 1. The Last of Us has translated to a TV show phenomenally well and so successfully, and I think in terms of a sort of overall video game adaptation list, that would be clear-cut number 1. In terms of films, it is Tomb Raider. I am gutted that for whatever reason the sequel got shelved. So Ben Wheatley was supposed to direct a sequel, and then something happened with the rights. I would imagine the pandemic had something to do with it, because if you look at this film being released in 2018, Ben Wheatley signing on to direct a sequel, maybe rights getting lapsed somewhere around there, and then now there's a Phoebe Waller-Bridge filming series that is on the way because rights have been picked up by somebody. It's a mess. But this film isn't. This film is very good. I enjoyed it enormously, and again I think it's my pick for the best film adaptation of a video game. So next week I'm going to do another top 5. I'm going to do another Farrand 5, and I'm going to do fantasy reissues. Now, there are a lot of films that have been reissued in cinemas over the summer, so things like My Neighbor Totoro, Coraline's just got reissued, all the Spider-Man films have been reissued, Neverending Story got a reissue for its re-release, for its anniversary. There are a lot of films that come round. They're doing a number of Batman films as well because of the 85th anniversary of Batman. So there's a lot of stuff that, like, I think that there are quite a few. There's almost like a bucket of films that you tend to see re-shown in cinemas a lot, like The Matrix gets shown in cinemas a lot more recently. So I'm going to pick 5 films that I've tried to be as niche as possible with, and I've tried to pick films that either I've not seen in the cinema before and I would love to go and see in the cinema, or there's a specific reason as to why I would want to see it reissued. Now, like, my favourite film of all time is The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight isn't on my reissue list because I've seen The Dark Knight in the cinema. I saw it in the IMAX when it was released. I then went and saw it again at the IMAX, and I know that it's one of the films as part of the Batman spread that, again, is being reissued and is constantly reissued and is constantly back in cinemas. So I'm going to try and steal away as much as possible from those films that are constantly getting it and talk about some more niche affair, which I think could do with a reissue, or I'd love to see get reissued, and then I'd go to the cinema and watch it probably. So that's next week. That's my fantasy reissues. Thank you very much for watching the first one of these. I'm hoping to keep carrying on with these and doing these every week. Like I say, sort of topical ones in line with things that are already in the cinema. So this week, sort of inspired by Borderlands. Next week, just generally inspired by reissues. I'm going to do a legacy sequels one when we come round to Beetlejuice. But yeah, you'll see where we go with it. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for listening. Stay safe, look after each other, and I will see you next time.